This is Inside the Right. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, longtime Republican operative, Tim Miller. So, Tim, I want to talk about Mike Johnson. He had very recently expressed hostility toward Vladimir Putin in the immediate aftermath of Alexei Navalny being killed. At the same time, he is also unilaterally responsible for Ukraine aid being labeled DOA, dead on arrival, in the House. So how do you square those two things? Is it that the prospect of a motion to vacate if he dares push through Ukraine aid is just that potent that he isn't going to be willing to move this forward?
Yeah, I will say I was at least encouraged by that he put out such an aggressive statement.
Yes,
right? Like his statement could have had more weasel words, and it was very harsh and targeted right at Putin and said the types of things that any sane person would say about the assassination of a political rival. And so that's a good sign. The question is, can he actually get this aid onto the floor when he has such a tiny majority, right? I mean, Kevin McCarthy, after he got kicked out of being speaker, he quit. Right? George Santos gets expelled and replaced by Tom Suozzi this past week. So McCarthy had that tiny majority. Johnson's is even smaller, right? So it only takes literally like two people. There were the 8 that had to kick out McCarthy. 2 or 3 could kick out Johnson. And as we've been talking about with regards to Tucker Carlson, there's a huge segment now in the Republican Party that this is a top issue for them. They do not want to do any Ukraine aid. They frankly are kind of rooting for Russia, basically. And so I think that he is potentially susceptible to a motion to vacate if he brings this to the floor. And I think that is a big open question right now, because it's the type of thing that would pass if it got to the floor easily.
Yeah. Do you think that there's any likelihood that the Democrats could come forward and do some type of deal to protect Mike Johnson if he did put forward Ukraine aid? Because obviously this is a big priority among Democrats and among, there's plenty of anti-Russia Republicans out there. But at the same time, there will be Democrats who say it's not the Democrats' responsibility to protect a Republican speaker.
Yeah, and I kind of agree with that. I think that there are a lot of potential sort of legislative machinations that people are going through right now. I think a lot of folks are waiting to see what Johnson does if you have to do that. And so there are ways for Democrats to work with Republicans to get a discharge petition or do other creative legislative ways to get stuff on the floor. The problem with that is, are there going to be Republicans that are going to work with you? We keep seeing this. There would be Republicans that say the right things with regards to Russia and Ukraine, but are they going to actually, if it means going around the speaker? We've seen the MAGA Republicans be willing to scalp a speaker and buck a speaker. We've not yet to date seen any of these moderate Republicans actually show the cojones to do it, right? And so the Democrats, despite the fact that it's a very narrow majority, they're still in the minority. And so in order to do any of this, they're going to need to get a couple Republicans on board. And I think that those Republicans are probably just going to sit based on past experience. They're probably going to sit around and see what Mike Johnson does and hope that Johnson kind of bails them out of that tough call.
Is this that potent of an issue for these Republicans that what they're going to go to the wall for is blocking aid to Ukraine? Or is it just because everything is a fight, everything is a battlefield, anything that would make the Democrats happy is a complete and total capitulation to the left, and we can't allow it?
No, I think it's become that big of an issue because it is wrapped up in this internal kind of globalist West versus nationalist fight within the Republican Party. And so, as soon as this got tied to immigration, obviously Russia has been a huge hot button on the right with Russiagate and Tucker going to Ukraine, or Tucker going to Russia, and others. There's a lot of, frankly, people that are sympathetic to Putin within the Russian, or excuse me, within the Republican Freudian slip, within the Republican caucus. So, and among the voters, among the voters, when I went to the Turning Point USA conference, when you ask them their top issues, these young far right Republicans, not supporting Ukraine was one of their top issues now. And so I think that among the base, among a certain contingent within the House conference, this is an issue where people are very passionate. They do not want to give any more resources from America to Ukraine, and it's part of their fight against the cultural left and all that. And so I do think that makes things really sticky for Mike Johnson.
What about this idea that if, for example, I mean, Russia has shown itself to be very willing to be an imperialist, expansionist country. I mean, from Georgia, Crimea, now Ukraine. There's a bunch of regions in eastern Ukraine that Russia's already laid claim over. This idea that if they continue to expand west and they get to a NATO country and it triggers Article 5 and the U.S. is dragged into like a global war with another nuclear power, like you think this is expensive now when we're talking about a $60 billion supplemental aid package, not only to Ukraine, but also to like replenish our own military. Right. You think this is expensive. What do you think World War III against a nuclear power is going to look like? Not in terms of just the financial cost, but also the human toll.
Yeah, so this is not my opinion, obviously, as a big supporter of NATO and a globalist former Republican. But their answer to you, the J.D. Vances of the world, would be, I don't know that we should defend all of the NATO countries.
And we're seeing that from Trump. This desire to like pull out of NATO or to go super soft on NATO.
And I find it very hard to imagine that the Republican Party, as it's constituted now, would want to defend Estonia or Latvia, right? Maybe if it's maybe if Putin started like really marching into Western Europe, might be a different animal. But I don't think that there's an appetite for this among the MAGA right for defending any of these countries, even if they are a NATO ally.
Yeah, and that's just like what you get from this emergence of like an increasingly isolationist Trump Republican Party. Let's talk about Alexander Smirnov, who was the whistleblower as far as it relates to Mike Johnson, who was the whistleblower that was like that this whole whistleblower. Yeah, it was a very which is a very generous interpretation of all of this. He was supposed to be like the smoking gun that proved that Joe and Hunter Biden were involved in some massive corruption scheme. The DOJ just indicted him for making false statements. Does this hurt the Biden impeachment effort, or does it not matter because it was never really predicated on facts anyway? It was all just to push this narrative.
I do think it kind of matters because they have to have something. There are enough Republicans, not very many, way too few, frankly. But Ken Buck, there have been enough of them that said they will not go along with impeachment unless they're shown something. And Smirnov, it's so amazing that his name's Smirnov. By the way, I
feel like the writers got lazy with it.
It's really lazy.
Yeah, it's like the villain named after the alcohol.
The Russian alcohol.
Yeah, the Russian alcohol.
Anyway. I think that there are enough Republicans in the House that are not going to go along with additional impeachment investigation if they don't have something. And Smirnov's accusations were pretty central to what Comer has been pushing through in his totally sham impeachment process. It got mentioned on Fox a million times. And what his claim was that Joe Biden met with Burisma officials, while he was still vice president, and that was that he still had evidence of this, right? So Hunter is an advisor to this Ukrainian company, and the claim was that when Biden was still in office, that they had met. And it turns out that just wasn't true. And so there's another example of Biden having met some of Hunter's business partners in 2017 when he was a private citizen. But you can't impeach somebody for what they did when they were just a guy in Delaware, a former vice president who wasn't even running for anything, right? Yeah. And so it was a pretty critical factual change, and now he's been indicted for it. Also worth noting, Trump-appointed prosecutor that is indicted him.
Yeah. Here's the one thing I'm having trouble with the whole Burisma thing. This is so in the weeds and obscure. So like generally in politics, like you want to make things as simple as possible. The prevailing notion is that if you're explaining, you're losing. And this seems like perfectly like scientifically engineered that you have to explain it. Otherwise, nobody knows what the fuck you're talking about. So how do you square those two things where you generally want your messages to be simple and this is so almost purposefully obscure?
Yeah, I mean, I think that part of the Republican strategy on this was just smoke and mirrors, right? Just kick up as much dirt as possible.
The Steve Bannon flood the zone with shit.
Exactly, and the hope is that you can just make Biden kind of seem crooked in the way that they did with Hillary. But the problem with that strategy is it only works if you have continuing information that comes out, right? Like this was what hurt Hillary, right? There would be new emails, new revelations, drip. And so even if the voter didn't really understand the email scandal, which a lot of them didn't, it just felt bad because it's like on the news all the time. And so they were trying to reproduce that with Biden, and it just hasn't worked because there isn't any drips. Well, there's nothing there to drip.
There's no drips, and the drips that were previously there are getting wiped up.
Yeah, right.
So
Yeah, no. So I think that's like the why their strategy, like with Biden, has failed. And I don't think that they were trying to make a very simple strategy. I think the idea was just going to be like, we're going to paint him into corrupt, like Biden crime family, right? Corruption broadly. And that will be the simple message, Biden crime family. And the details will be kind of all complicated and murky. And it just hasn't worked.
Yeah. Well, I guess prediction time. What do you think James Comer does with this? Because I feel like every time something gets debunked, we always turn around and say, like, there is no way that James Comer could be so shameless that he'll keep going on with this, and he does. But this one's really bad. I mean, like you said, this was the predicate for so much of these suggestions that Joe Biden and Hunter Biden were involved in some scheme, and now this is gone too. So, do you think that James Comer moves forward with this thing?
I mean, he just has so much pressure too, right? Like from Trump world, this is his whole reason for being, is to try to get somebody impeached in the Biden family. And so to me, I think that the Biden impeachment has lost steam. And I do think that the Biden impeachment probably goes away. I mean, even Matt Gaetz was like making fun of Jim Comer and saying that guy has not brought the receipts. And so I think that there will be continued investigations, subpoenas, dog and pony shows, bringing Hunter Biden, all that sort of stuff. That will continue. But I think the Biden impeachment is probably dead.
Well, we have the great fortune of being able to figure this out over the next coming months here. So obviously we'll stay on top of this. For those watching right now, if you want to see more from Tim, make sure to subscribe to The Bulwark. That's Tim's YouTube channel. I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video so you can hear and see from him throughout the week. With that said, I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Tim Miller.
This is Inside the Right.